Okay, well, hi everyone. This interview is especially exciting for us as we are here with our dads to talk about the importance of voting. We are here with Ed Vedder from Pearl Jam, as well as a co-founder of EVRP, and Mike Anders, the founder of Iconic, and who is also on the board of the World Surf League. They both play a large role also in Global Citizen and care deeply about making the world a better place. Thank you guys for being here.
Well, we've been together for 6 months straight, but I'm happy to be here with you today.
I'm happy to be with you guys. Of course, happy to be next to Layla.
So we wanted to start off by asking you both what voting means to you and why do you think it's important?
So, well, obviously voting is really, really, really important because our whole democracy is predicated on our ability to decide who we want to help us govern our country. And it's you know, when times are generally pretty good, you forget how important voting is. But when things get really challenging, whether it's around the economy or whether it's around social issues or whether it's around corruption, you know, the importance of voting becomes even more paramount. So it's really critical that even when times are good, that we you know, really take advantage of this sacred right, which is our right to vote. It's really, really important.
Yeah, and I would, to go along with that, you know, it is, it can be said, it's the single form of, most powerful form of nonviolent protest. And it is a time for everyone's voice to be heard and that everyone's vote is equal. You know, that the richest guy in town, he gets one vote. And so does the busboy and the dishwasher and everybody else. It's a time that we believe, you know, I know our group works on, you know, trying to encourage, you know, since back in '92, using our platform as a band, just thinking it the healthiest thing to encourage everybody to vote, not to take it for granted, and that we feel, you know, as a country, we are our best selves when everybody's voice is heard. You know, and there, you know, it's interesting, someone brought up the other day to me, you know, if you live in, let's say, a blue state like California or I think Washington, you know, they'd say, well, does our vote really matter? And I think this election, you know, one other funny thing, I realized that I actually agree with Donald Trump on one thing. I found a thing that I agree with him on. And that was the other day, he said, this is the most important election in our country's history. So going with that, you know, using your voice at this time, even in a blue state, is important because we have this thing called the Electoral College. And I think, you know, the last election, Hillary won by 3 million votes in the popular vote. And yet the way our electorate is structured in the process, which is an old and antiquated process, which is the Electoral College, people feel like their vote may not count. But I think in order to maybe re-examine and change this old process, I think when you see it will be evidence to be used to create a new process, establishing the popular vote. When people see that this is a flawed system, if somebody's winning by, you know, 3 million, 4 million, 5 million votes, and yet they're still not winning the election. So I think, again, in so many aspects, this is the most important election of our time.
Yeah. Can you guys both talk about your first time voting and like how that experience was for you, when it was? Do you remember?
I remember mine. I believe I was 20 because 20 in 1984, and I believe that was Ronald Reagan running for his second term against a guy named Walter Mondale. But the other cool thing was that Mondale had the first woman ever on a presidential ticket running for vice president. Her name was Geraldine Ferraro. And they were much more on the progressive side of things. And even Reagan was way more in the middle than what we have now. But you know, that was a 60-40 election. 60-40 where Mondale only got 40% of the vote. But because of the Electoral College, he won 49 out of 50 states. And that was I think that was only the second time that had ever happened. So my first voting process, I remember being disappointed. And I think that's a good character builder. I think whether it was the Chicago Cubs or Ralph Nader or many other things that we've been active in, we had to suffer many disappointments, and I believe that's what made us stronger in the end as activists, and knowing that none of it's easy. And you know, just to speak about activism very quickly, because you know it starts with voting, but that's one of the main issues that comes around every 2 years and then 4 years for the big elections. But activism, you know, it's something that you know, if you could, you know, with environment and, you know, let's say Surfrider Foundation or saving a surf break, or there's a, you know, trestles, we fought hard to keep developers from running through trestles, and we actually, you know, it was a lot of work, and a lot of great people did work, and attorneys and activists and protesters and sit-ins and court cases. And then you win. And then 6 months later, the developers have a new idea and they're coming back at you. So I guess one thing I was going to say is it takes activism, takes stamina, and when you do get a victory, it's really something to celebrate and remember how that feels, because you'll always end up being challenged again.
Yeah, on my standpoint, you know, I actually don't 100% remember the first time I voted. I wasn't the greatest of students back in the day, nor was I the most engaged civilian when I was sort of a teenager. But I do remember the first time that I caught the bug of sort of being interested in politics and interested in what good government can do. And it's funny, I was probably 18 years old. I was probably a really bored teenager trying to just kill time. So bored that I was watching C-SPAN. And I remember Bill Clinton speaking as a candidate with Al Gore by his side. And I just remember the very moment where I heard that, you know, these possibilities are attainable, and that, you know, someone who does care and is empathetic and can inspire, he really captivated me in a way I didn't expect any politician ever do. So much so that I ended up going to Washington, D.C. and doing an internship for then Congressman Jack Reed, now Senator Jack Reed. And I also spent my fall semester at college knocking on doors in Rhode Island for Patrick Kennedy, who was a congressman at the time running for office. So I can't remember my first actual vote that I casted, but I imagine it was around that time, because I really had been inspired by folks that saw the world could be better tomorrow. The first, I guess the most memorable vote was certainly in 2008 for Barack Obama. I remember exactly where I was, where I was voting. And it just was a really magical moment in history, because since it had been years and years and years since I had been inspired again like that. And to cast the vote for the first African-American president, to cast the vote for someone who had been right on so many issues was really exciting. So in addition to what Ed just said, you need to have staying power and persistence, and you need to just, stick with it, because sometimes your vote doesn't go your way. But it sure does help to be inspired and to have candidates that inspire you. And understanding that the system of balance of power just means that, no candidate is going to get everything they want. And so it's the beauty of the system is that you need to work with all sides of the aisle and all aspects of the system, but nonetheless, to be inspired is a really exciting thing.
Oh, yeah. So both of you have very different jobs. Could you talk about how you find meaning in terms of activism in your work?
Yeah, so I find meaning in my work in a few ways. I mean, first of all, I work for a handful of just really smart investors who all are good people, and I spend every day learning from them, listening to them, and so I get a lot of joy and learnings from our own client base. But a couple of years ago, we launched Iconic Impact, which was our effort to try to break down silos in philanthropy and really try to leverage our network of clients and investors around the world to collaborate around big social issues. I think one of the challenges in philanthropy is it's very isolated. It's very overwhelming. It's easy to give to your alma mater or your kid's school. It's easy to give to your religious institution. But if you really want to tackle the big social issues like racial injustice, like the environment, like women and girls, it's very hard to do that in a way that's measurable and scalable. And so we launched Iconic Impact to really convene and foster collaboration amongst some of the smartest people in the world, and exposing proven social entrepreneurs who have workable models to an ecosystem of extremely thoughtful, smart, wealthy investors who can couple their capital with their time and talent to help these social entrepreneurs scale. So I get a lot of enthusiasm and impact through that platform. And I also get to spend time with amazing philanthropic platforms like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, like Audacious Ideas, like Blue Meridian. And in the World Surf League, we launched Pure, which is our effort to solve for ocean health, which is really personally an important issue for me. And so from Iconic Impact to WSL Pure, those are two ways where I get a lot of impact personally.
That's big stuff too.
Thanks.
Incredible. And just, being dedicated to this idea that you can take an issue, a problem, a conundrum, and figure out a win-win situation, where, we worked, an example, there was a group called Conservation International that we would work with. It was one of the first ones that Stone Gossard, our guitar player, got involved with. And, outside of, in the years before that, it was more of a tree hugging, for lack of a better term, approach. And also reading up on, Edward Albee, the Monkey Wrench Gang. But this was a different process, and it would come down to things like, carbon offset programs, and Conservation International going to Starbucks and saying, here's how to have a sustainable coffee growing industry in a small town in an area like Peru or Ecuador or something, that they would give them the business plan and say, look, you can make the same profit, you can, make the same product, but you can do it in a way that's environmentally sensitive and sustainable for the community. And, that was that was a way to actually see progress being made. Instead of just kind of at loggerheads ideologically with, big business. So that's to hear that it's just such a positive approach, and you see results, I assume. I think that's the key. Again, seeing those good results and making some headway. And usually there is a win-win situation. It's more about breaking down those boundaries, and coming together. And I've seen it with a number of people. I think that's how Bono and Bob Geldof got a lot of work done, for AIDS in Africa. I think that's, Jack Johnson's done some things with the certain developers in Hawaii, Pupukea, and Turtle Bay, things like that. But it was really going to what we thought was the enemy and trying to work out some solutions.
Yeah, and talk a little bit more about like what you guys do, as a band. Like,
well, we've always, I think, we do a lot of things that we don't talk about or no one needs to know, and we're not looking for credit. But what I will say about it, when we go into different cities, we take a certain amount from every show. We find usually there are arts programs, maybe some programs assisting the homeless, maybe homeless teens in particular, or single mothers that are out on the street or living in cars. But we go into, every show we play, we will meet 3 or 4, we will vet and research about 4 different organizations, but then we get to meet the people too. And that's really what's inspiring, because you're seeing the people who are dedicating their whole lives to working with these very tricky situations. And there are some, moments of joy and progress, but for the most part, they're living in conflict, or in situations that can be truly upsetting. Not all the stories end up happy. So it's just very inspiring to always be in touch with the people on the ground, and then we're going to do a voting initiative that we're going to announce next week. What would have happened, the plans back in March were that at this time, I think we'd be leaving this week, we'd all be kind of strategically traveling through the swing states, encouraging people to vote at this time. We had shows in Florida and Arizona and Pennsylvania and Ohio. And so now we're trying to find other ways to still have some kind of outreach in those places. So we have something we're going to announce, I think this week.
It'll be announced by the time this is out.
Oh, it will, yeah. So it'll be called PJ Vote. That's right, by the time it's out. Yeah. And it's really encouraging not only you or the folks that we already kind of have their ear, but remind them to talk to 3 or 4 or 5 people about it. We're encouraging everyone, highly encouraging them to vote by mail. And, it seems obvious during this pandemic that it's the safest thing to do. It's frustrating that certain people are trying to cloud the issue and make it seem like a unsubstantiated process that's never been tried before. Washington State, we've been voting strictly by mail for the last 10 years. I've been voting absentee ballot for 30 because we'd always be on tour. The studies that have shown that there's just infinitesimal amount of fraud or voter fraud. It was interesting to hear the Attorney General talk about it the other day, that it was a and I agreed with him. I was happy to hear that he was worried about an election potentially being able to be corrupted. And if he's thinking that way, he should think less about voting by mail than that thing we talked about earlier, which is the Electoral College. Because between gerrymandering, the popular vote, this is where you can really corrupt an election. So I'm glad he's got it on his mind. I just think he's looking at the wrong place to see a problem. And just one last thing, I've always felt, if it was my, let's say I'm more a Democrat or more liberal or whatever, if the party that I was interested in seemed to be the party that wanted less people to vote, that were kind of engaging in voter suppression or not being able to vote by mail or having to risk your life or the safety of the others in order to go place a ballot, I'd be very suspect of my own party. It's not just because of maybe the conservative side or this current administration is doing that in open sight right now. If it was my own party, I'd feel it was very conspicuous, and I wouldn't trust that.
And, we both know, obviously, that both of you travel a lot for work. And as Americans who've been here your whole life, we just want to know, your takeaways on how the citizens of other countries view the U.S. and, conversations you've had since the 2016 election, but also just how you feel as an American, like I said, having conversations with people who aren't here and they're just watching from the outside.
Well, I will say this, traveling, one thing that's been a blessing of our jobs, you'll agree, but is to see the world. And I'm very fortunate I get to interact with people. I get in a room with large groups of people. You kind of get a feel for them. You get a feel for the locals. You get a feel for their society, their communities, their governments. Going back to what you were saying, Mike, you weren't the most engaged teenager. I agree. I gave up as far as geography or language. We came from kind of small beginnings. So I was like, why do I want to learn about some place that I will never go to? It felt like it was just like taunting me. Just so all those years, and then all of a sudden you have a job where you're learning geography, language, history, in real time, and by experience. It's been probably one of the greatest parts about the whole exploration, the whole adventure, But when you do that, you come back to your own country and wonder what could be better, And I've always been a proud citizen of the United States, sometimes more than others. And I will agree. I mean, the best part was 8 years of going around the country and having people saying, wow, President Barack Obama, is he truly just the most incredible man, or is it just me? And it was so, those were proud years as an American. And things go in cycles. Now we're experiencing something different. And now people are very curious. It's just the questions are different.
Yeah, I would agree.
Mystified.
Yeah, my job tends to be in a lot of boardrooms or living rooms versus stadiums, and I think when I'm in cities around the world, I think initially in 2017 when Trump was sort of elected, there was more like a curiosity of how is this possible? But as you saw the situation around the world become worse and worse by, Supreme Court appointees, by a lot of the other stuff that was happening, the stakes became less around curiosity and more around, alarm. And so I think there is a general sense of concern around the world from the folks I spend time with. My relationship with lots of these people is professional. And so a lot of times we don't talk politics, and it's not whether you're a Democrat or Republican. It's about decency, and it's about common sense, and it's about, economic policy, and all of which is just seemingly, not working for people these days. And so I think there is a general discontent, alarm, real sense of being upset, because people are just hurting around the world. I'd also, Layla and I were talking about this morning, that as dark as the days are in America right now, and we'll get to the hopeful part of this, because we should be hopeful. No, the world's a mess. You don't have to, it's also in Brazil. It's, Le Pen is gaining in every single French election. And so we're at a moment in global history where a populist movement is existing, and it's scary. And so, and I think, for better or for worse, over the last, number of decades, the U.S. has been this beacon of hope, of optimism, and of comebacks. And we will come back, but this is just a very dark moment. And I'm hoping that the moment is so dark that it gets people off the sidelines, and we can ultimately get, the best of who we can be. But other countries around the world, everywhere I go, they're both scared for America, but they're scared for themselves, because every country is facing a challenge to the system.
Wow, yeah. And you talked a little bit about this, but so do you feel hopeful and about this next generation of young kids turning out to vote? And if yes, what have you seen that makes you feel this way?
Well, for starters, you two guys. I mean, to be dealt with the current circumstances, which is, going into impressionable years of high school without your friends, without being in a classroom, to be sort of, saddled by your parents' side for 6 months, and to put together a serious conversation about some of the big issues in the world. Gives me incredible hope. I'm really proud of both of you guys. I also get hope from Global Citizen, which Ed and I are both involved with, as are you guys, ambassadors to Global Citizen, to see this global movement of young people who care, who are calling their representatives, who are knocking on doors, who are sending tweets, who are really stirring up the status quo. Gives me hope. And then I see it, directly in my day job, because, Iconic has 300 employees now, and a lot of them are young. And when we recruit people to come to Iconic, or we retain our employees to stay at Iconic, they're making us raise the bar. It isn't just about investing. It's about investing with conscience. It's not just about compounding returns. It's about thinking about the world, launching Iconic Impact. And I just see every day, I get the luxury of working with people that are younger and smarter, and they really care about the world in a way that I certainly didn't when I was 18 watching C-SPAN. So I am hopeful. In terms of voting, I can't answer that. I mean, I think it's obviously critical, but some of that just comes with time, and people will get passionate or inspired or panicked in their own moment. And I just hope it's now, because the stakes have never ever been higher, and the importance of voting is really critical. And so I am hopeful in the big picture because of this generation that's coming up. But I do hope that everyone gets out and votes, because it's such a critical juncture in our history.
Well, I think too that your generation is different. You have different ways of communicating. You have technology that could not have even been imagined. It's basically science fiction. compared to 1982 or 1992 even.
Yeah.
So, and then you add some of the biggest issues, you know, that of the last 100 years are happening now. And whether it's race, gender equality, Me Too movements, environment, you know, the climate, which is probably, you know, that's the one that really has a timeline. But all these big issues, you know, it's growing pains, and we're going through it now. But I'm saying that you guys, you're aware of it. These are big issues. They're happening during your time. You're coming into an age where you can make a difference, even though you still have 2 years before you can place your first vote.
Not her. She's voting this year.
Oh, that's right. That's right. But you know, these are big issues, and those big issues, they can bring unity. And I think that I really feel like in this generation and the next, you know, so many of these things that, you know, when we grew up, I don't even know if we knew what a same-sex marriage was, or it was not a, you know, it was like, it's just really, if you look at it objectively, so much has changed. It ain't perfect yet. And change seems to go slow, and then it can like kind of flip fairly quick if you just kind of keep putting that teaspoon of sand. Pete Seeger used to talk about a teeter-totter with a huge boulder on one side, and millions of people putting teaspoons of sand on the other, and then all of a sudden one day it lifts the boulder, and it was just teaspoons of all people united. And the one thing that can be worrisome on the same tip as all that is that you get so much information. You can be inundated and you can be overwhelmed. And I know that happens to the adults. I know that happens to just about everybody, especially this is one of those times when it's happening. It seems to be happening a lot. And we're stuck in our homes. And if we didn't, I thought, you know, as a country, it felt very divided back in January. And now we are literally divided, even more so. And that's what we really have to fight against. And that's what we have to be excited about in this moment. And we have 59 days before we get to vote, and we get to be heard, and we get to make a change, and we get to unite. And that's what we have to be excited and empowered, and don't let it get us down that we're overwhelmed and we don't feel like we can do anything about it. There's too many issues, and we're just overwhelmed. We can get through it. It's going to be a quick 59, well, depending on when this comes out, it could be 30 to, you know, it's, as of today, it's 59 days to really crank up the energy. And I think everyone can do it if we remind each other to stay positive, because it's gonna get worse before it gets better. But we got this.
Yeah.
We got this.
Our last question, since we are here with you guys are both fathers raising multiple girls, and also very loving husbands. And how do you feel looking at this country, you know, regarding the safety of all women in the country, but also, you know, the ones close to you? And does this impact, you know, the way you're voting this year?
I mean, people in other countries, or people who, was one of the things they were curious about this president, or it was, how could a man who said such horrific things about women still be elected? You know, and what did that say about us? And what did it say when people seemed to agree with something when he said this horrific thing about women and how you can treat them? And then, not only did he insult every woman on the planet, then he insulted the men by saying, oh, that's how we talk all the time. through everybody, and men and women under, it's still shocking. But your question was, does it affect who we vote for? I'm hoping and thinking that the workplace does become more inclusive. I think that's, again, it seems obvious, and sometimes it does take time, but I think the time is now. I think it's made it far enough where it's an issue that's not brand new.
Yeah, I would agree. To me, this is probably, well, I guess first, it's always an important issue, and it is an important issue today as much as it ever has been. There's so many things that are wrong right now that it's sort of like, where do we begin? But to me, one of the biggest sort of tragedies of the last 4 years was, the courts and, a woman's right to choose and equal pay. All these issues are things that are being dismantled and have, a long time to fix, because these court appointees are for, in many cases, much longer than an administration. So one of the driving forces for me to vote is 100% to get a president in who believes in a woman's right to choose and equal pay and, women's rights. And as a dad of 2 girls, as someone who, has 52% women working at my company, and as a woman, as someone who has a wife who doesn't settle, I'm sort of surrounded by people holding me accountable in a great way. But yeah, this issue is really paramount. And, I think we have to be, one of the most painful things to think about was when there was a vacancy on the Supreme Court and President Obama was still in office. It was the year of the election, but he was still president. And somehow, he wasn't allowed to get his, candidate through the Senate process because it was held up by Mitch McConnell. And I still, in this day, I lose sleep over that because it is just so unfair. And I think, I wish Ruth Bader Ginsburg many, many, many more years of health and productivity. But the court is getting older by the day, and we cannot afford to have another Supreme Court appointee made by President Trump. It just would be a lasting damage that would be beyond, our years. And so I think that's a critical issue in this election, and it hopefully will get anyone who's wavering about getting off the sidelines to vote. I hope this issue drives people to the polls. And the one thing I would also say that echoing what Ed said is, there's going to be that it's going to get a little bit worse before it gets better. And I think we also want to condition people to this election in particular. I don't have these numbers, exactly right, but I think something like 70% of the Republicans polled are going to vote at the voting booth, and 70% of Democrats polled, this was a Bloomberg poll, I think, are going to mail in. And so what happens is the day of the election, the votes are going to be counted quicker in the actual voting booths, and there's going to be a pretty significant delay in counting the mail-in ballots. And so you can expect, it's just, to me, so clear, Trump's playbook: declare victory way before it's official, discount corruption, ironically, from the other side about, the mail-in. And so I think we need to have a real awareness of some of this suppression, some of the bullying, some of the intimidation tactics that are inevitably going to happen. We need to prepare ourselves. We need to have grit. We need to have perseverance. And we really need to think strategically about how do we anticipate what's about to come in the next couple months, because I think it's going to be hard enough to win, but now we've got a hand tied behind our back and, a foot tied to our hand. And it's really crazy what we're dealing with, but it's important that we understand it, we address it, and, we tackle it head on, and then, we will see better days after that. But that's an important piece to acknowledge.
Yeah, that's nice.
Thank you,
So-
Layla.
Thank you so much to our dads for taking the time and joining us today. And thank you for inspiring us with all that you do. We feel so lucky to have you guys in our lives. Now that this conversation is over, it's time to take action. Please go check out our collaboration with Headcount at headcount.org/let's talk and make sure that you are registered to vote. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.